righty, good morning. Good morning. Can everyone hear me? Is it working? It's working? Cool. It's working. I'm losing this battle right now. All righty. Good morning. How's everyone doing? Good, good. Me too. Enjoying the cooler weather. Awesome. Well, hopefully you were able to be here last week for Jake when he kicked us off on our topic. I always enjoy, and I think he enjoys it too, teaching with Jake. I think we have a good time together. It's funny when we sat down to kind of walk through like what our plans were going to be, it was kind of like, oh, I'd really like to do this. And in my mind, I'm like, oh, I do not want to do that at all. And then he'd be like, oh, I really want to do this. Or I really want to do this one. And so it really worked super nicely. It always does. I really enjoyed teaching with Jake. So excited to get into it today. We're gonna continue our talk about the life of David. Specifically, I'm really, really proud of this subtitle, and I've got a funny joke about it, but we're going to look at the wives of David through the eyes of the husbands he took them from. What's funny about this is on the drive here, I was so proud of this. I was like, oh, it's edgy. It's like, and on the drive here, I was telling my wife, and she was like, why didn't you just do like the stolen wives of David? And I'm like, well, that sums it up pretty nicely, but it's not as long, and I don't know. I liked this one, but anyways. So just a reminder about this book. I stole this slide from Jake. This is kind of like the overview of how we're approaching this class, right? So 2 Samuel specifically is a book about David's time as king, but it's important to remember that 1 and 2 Samuel were one book originally, and really the whole book in its entirety is about this massive power struggle between Saul and David, and who is on God's side and whose side is God on. It's also super good reminders that the good stumble. David is always characterized as the man after God's own heart, right? He wrote a majority of the Psalms. We see him in worship and solitude with God. But we also, as we're going to see today, he has made some pretty bad and horrible mistakes. But still through that, he finds a way to have what I would say is a direct relationship with God. Persevering through adversity again and again, things do not always go his way. And he has to finagle and work, and he has to be kind of scrappy at times to get things to move forward in the way that God wants things to go. And then I really loved this one. Jake and I had talked about it. It reads like a soap opera. It's so good. And I know like we don't usually give like homework or anything, but I would strongly encourage you, like as we're going through this class, like just by yourself, like read through the whole book, 1 and 2 Samuel, because you'll really start to see these like repeated themes pop up throughout the narratives in here. So I'll flash up the schedule here. So we're on Wives of David. Reminder, next week is the lectureship. So I'm not sure who is teaching, but it's probably on the lectureship schedule. And then we'll kick back up with David's family drama. All righty. So we're going to dig in. Let's just get going. I'm going to look at all these slides. All right. I want to talk a little bit. I want to set the scene a little bit for the book, one of the central themes of the book of Samuel. There's a scholar that I really like named Robert Alter, and he has a really good commentary on the book of Samuel. I'm going to read a little snippet from his commentary. He says, the stories of Saul and David are interlocked antithetically on the theme of knowledge. Saul, from first to last, is a man deprived of knowledge he desperately seeks. He has to turn to the seer and Samuel to find his father's donkeys, In subsequent episodes, he has no luck with oracles and divination and guiding him on his military way, and he tries to coerce fate by imposing a rash vow of fasting on his troops in the midst of battle. He seizes on the report of informers in his pursuit of David, but David continues to elude him. David, on the other hand, at first seems peculiarly favored with knowledge. The position that he is brought to the court to fill is for a man skilled in playing. He's prudent in speech. In what follows, David demonstrates impressive prudence and agile resourcefulness. It also emerges that once he has become a fugitive, he's rapidly equipped with an oracular ephod and a priest to use it. And so in contrast to Saul, he has a direct line of communication with God when he's making his decisions. We see this throughout the whole book as David kind of starts to elude Saul in the end of 1 Samuel. Things just kind of seem to go David's way, right? He's gallivanting through, he's going and getting the bread of the presence, he's going through and doing all this stuff, and things are just kind of going this way. And Saul is continually grasping at straws. He's trying, and then he goes to the witch of Endor, and he's just not quite doing it right. But David always seems to kind of have the knowledge that Saul is lacking. And that's an interesting thing that I think we're going to see come up over and over as we go through this. I think we'll also see eventually with David, he loses some of that knowledge too. I think there is a tipping point where some of his mistakes kind of catch up with him, and he has to learn how to deal with those. So we're going to jump in. We're going to start off really quickly because I am probably going to run out of time, so I'm just going to say that right now. But we're going to start off really quickly with some of the first wives. I will say these ones weren't necessarily stolen wives or taken from other men, but there's some really cool stories here. And again, this is where I would encourage you, like, go home like this week if you're doing Bible reading or anything, like make it Samuel, because some of the narratives are awesome. But the first one I want to mention is Abigail. I think we're all maybe familiar with Abigail, but she has this husband named Nabal that no one likes, like at all. Everyone hates him, including her, it seems. And there's this scene where David sends his men to Nabal, and he says, hey, like, your shepherds, they're shearing the sheep, and we've kind of been protecting them, and nothing's happened to them. They haven't gotten raided, things like that. Do you have anything that you can kind of spare, like anything that you can kind of give us during this time? In the time when people sheared sheep, you'll see that sometimes in the Old Testament. It'll say it was during the time that they were shearing the sheep. That's kind of like a festive time. It was an exciting time. There would be feasts and celebrations and things like that. And so he says, like, Nabal says to the guys, who is David that I should know who he is, right? And he really kind of undercuts David. And thankfully, one of the guys kind of heard this and went and told Abigail, and Abigail was like, okay, I got this. And she's going to clean up this mess. Because it made David mad. David drew his sword and told his all of his kind of posse to draw their swords, and they're like, all right, we're going to go to battle. And there's 400 people that he was just going to go completely destroy Nabal. But Abigail steps in and says, hey, like, I'm sorry. And she brings him bread and all this stuff. And like, here, like, thank you for taking care of the shepherds and keeping things upright. And then she kind of subtly says, hey, like, I'm your servant. Like, if you need anything, she's kind of dropping hints that she would not be opposed to being married to him. And then what do you know? When she tells Nabal what she did, Nabal has like a heart attack and he dies and keels over. And then perfect opportunity. Again, soap opera style drama. Perfect opportunity. So then David says, okay, hey, let's go get Abigail. And Abigail becomes one of his wives. Another one that's mentioned more briefly is Ahinoam. And she's mentioned alongside Abigail in another super cool narrative where their camp is like attacked and raided and they're kidnapped. All of the wives and children of the army, including David's wives, are kidnapped. And the men get back and they are distraught. They're even at the point of potentially turning on David. They're so distraught. And David kind of steps back, and he gets the ephod and the priest, and he talks to God, and he says, God, like, can I catch these guys? Can I go get these guys? And will you give them into my hand? And God says, yeah, go get them. And he does. And he kills them. He wipes them out, and they get everything back. And he rescues his wives. Really cool stories. Again, we're not going to dig into those ones specifically. But I want to get into some of the bulk. We're going to talk about two. We're going to talk about two men. So remember, the subtitle is The Wives of David Through the Eyes of the Husbands that he took them from. So the first husband that we're going to look at is this guy named Paltiel. Let's go ahead and open up our Bibles to 1 Samuel 18. All right, we're gonna read here in about starting in verse 20. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna go a little bit earlier, at verse 17. So Saul has a daughter, an older daughter actually, that he's gonna marry. He's like, oh hey, wouldn't it be great if you married my daughter? And David kind of humbles himself. He's like, oh, I'm but a slave. Like, what business do I have doing that? And then Saul marries her off to someone else. And then eventually it's like, oh, I never married anyone to David. So what about Michal? Michal's a good option. So then in 17, then Saul said to David, here is my elder daughter. Oh, I'm sorry. Moving down a little bit. In verse 20. Now Saul's daughter, Michal, loved David. And they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. Saul thought, let me give her to him, that she may be a snare for him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Therefore Saul said to David a second time, you shall now be my son-in-law. And Saul commanded his servants, speak to David in a private way and say, behold, the king has delight in you, and all his servants love you. Now then, become the king's son-in-law. And Saul's servants spoke those words in the ears of David, and David said, does it seem to you a little thing to become the king's son-in-law, since I'm a poor man and I have no reputation? And the servants of Saul told him, thus and so did David speak. Then Saul said, thus you shall say to David, the king desires no bride's price except 100 foreskins of the Philistines, that he may be avenged of the king's enemies. Now Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. When his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law. Before the time had expired, David arose, went along with his men, and killed 200 of the Philistines. And David brought their foreskins, which were given in full number to the king, that he might become a king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him his daughter Michal for a wife. But when Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him, Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continually. Oh man, I just love, again, this is like a soap opera drama, right? It's this back and forth. Do you see what I'm kind of talking about, where Saul's just kind of trying anything? He's kind of grasping at straw. Oh, maybe I'll do this little gossip, I'll do this little drama. And David's the opposite. He's like, cool, 100? How about 200? And he just goes, and he's a man of action, and he gets it done, and he does what he needs to do. And I think it's important, the writer of Samuel, as he goes through all these narratives and he narrates to us, he gives us these little clues, right? Like, oh, well, the daughter of Saul, Michal, loved David. He gives us these little hints and insights into what Saul was thinking and some of his motives. And I think that's really important. I think that the author really is, while this is in many ways a history kind of a historical account, it's very much a story as well. And you can tell that the author is thinking about the people that are going to be reading these stories, giving them information so that they kind of feel a part of it. They're clued in, and maybe even they can relate to it a little bit. So we know that Michal loved David. David paid the price twofold, And then we see, if we fast forward a little bit into chapter 19, verse 9, then a harmful spirit from the Lord came upon Saul as he sat in his house with his spear in his hand, and David was playing the lyre. And Saul sought to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he eluded Saul, so that he struck the spear into the wall. And David fled and escaped that night. We're not going to get into the harmful spirit thing, because Jake will probably do that. It's a really easy one, so I'll save that one for him. But if we keep going on into verse 12, then he escapes and he runs home. So Michal let David down. Saul sends his men to come to their house. And then we're told that, so Michal in verse 12, let David down through the window, and he fled away and escaped. Michal took an image, laid it on the bed, and put a pillow of goat's hair on the head and covered it with the clothes. And when Saul sent his messengers to take David, she said, he's sick. I won't keep on reading, but if you go through, he's sick and he's in bed. So they say, fine, we're just going to go get the whole bed. And they bring the bed out. And then what do you know? They pull the blanket off, and there's this, feathers and a picture, an image. But there's not David, because she helped David escape. Does this remind you of anything? I'll slow down now. So I really like discussion classes. I know I haven't had a chance to shut up here, but what does this remind you guys of? Does this story, what does it feel like? She loves him, but the father is, wants her to kind of bring him away from God, and then everyone's out to get him, and then she helps him escape. And Isaac, yeah, definitely, yeah, Isaac. I think it's almost a theme that we're kind of familiar with everywhere. I can think of Shakespeare plays, or, very kind of cinematic, for lack of a better word, kind of feel. Any other thoughts? What do you think's going through Michal's head right now? Yeah, Richard.
I don't know exactly what's going through her head, but Saul said, I'm going to use her as a snare to, let me back up here. Okay, anyway, I think one of the things that it says there, that Saul says that I'll give Michal, but she's going to be a snare to him. In other words, he's hoping to do harm with her. And the first snare, of course, would be you got to kill 100 Philistines.
Yeah.
Okay. The second snare that seems very subtle here, but it says there's a household idol.
Yeah.
So where does that come from? I mean, it seems to me like Michal is other-minded than just in the one true God. She's got other idols inside the house that's leading her along, and could become that snare once again to David.
Absolutely.
I mean, how's David going to deal with that thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Great. That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, we see this a little bit. We see this with, was it Laban as well? And they steal the house idol, this concept of house idols, right? That's a great point. I think maybe Saul's hoping, again, he doesn't know. He's not talking to God. God's not telling him what to do. But he's hoping, maybe this will work. Maybe Michal will pull him away because she's got some potential secular idols and things that are still in her life. Yeah, great point. Any other thoughts? All right, real quick. Let's jump over to 2 Samuel. We're finally in 2 Samuel, chapter 3. So I know Jake talked about this a little bit. Again, super fast recap, but we're going to get into this more in some of the later, in the military conquest specifically. But fast forward, he's been on the run. Civil war has kind of broken out, right, between Saul and David. Saul eventually dies, and his son Ishbosheth kind of replaces him. But there's still this very clear civil war going on. Is David the Lord's anointed? Is it Ishbosheth by way of Saul? And then we have this guy named Abner that I know we've talked about a little bit, but he's kind of the guy that made things happen for Saul and now for Ishbosheth, his son. So let's read real quick in verse 12. There's kind of a falling out between Abner and Ishbosheth that's super fascinating. Again, I recommend you to go read that, but we don't have time to get into that. So we're going to start in verse 12. So Abner's mad. He's kind of thinking about contemplating about flipping sides here. And Abner sent messengers to David on his behalf, saying, "To whom does the land belong?" Oh, wait, I'm sorry. This is important. I forgot. I wanted to mention something. I can't find it, so I'll just mention it. After this happens and David escapes down through the window, we're given a little note at the end. I think it's in 19. Anyways, I can't chase that, but we're given a little note that Saul says that he sends Michal off to an individual named Palti. End of 25 of 1 Samuel. Thank you. Last verse. So, yeah, perfect. So David's been on the run. He's kind of left. He takes on Ahinoam of Jezreel, and both of them become his wives. And then in 44, so Saul had given Michal, his daughter, David's wife, to Palti, the son of Laish, who was of Galim. So that's important. Keep that in mind. All right, where were we? All right, verse 12 of chapter 3 of 2 Samuel. And Abner sent messengers to David on his behalf, saying, "To whom does the land belong? Make your covenant with me, and behold, my hand shall be with you to bring over all Israel to you." And he said, "Good, I will make my covenant with you, but one thing I require of you, that is, you shall not see my face unless you first bring Michal, Saul's daughter, when you come to see my face." Then David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, "Give me my wife Michal, for whom I paid the bridal price of 100 foreskins of the Philistines." And Ishbosheth sent and took her from her husband Paltiel, the son of Laish. But her husband went with her, weeping after her all the way to Bahurim. Then Abner said to him, "Go and return." And he returned. Why do you think that the author of Samuel gives us this little nugget? We see Michal on the way out at the end of 25, and it's very matter of fact. Saul sent Michal to Paltiel, or Palti is what they call him there. And then here we're given this little nugget into the insight of the emotions of this poor guy, Paltiel. Why do you think that happens? Why do you think we're given that? I promise I can outweight all of you in silence. Yeah, Vicky. We got one coming. There's always someone who doesn't like silence more than me.
I think this just shows the depravity of Saul. I mean, he has laid waste David and Michal's marriage and given her to somebody else, and it affected this gentleman, Mr. Palti, in such a real way that he's just devastated. Yeah. I mean, the depravity of Saul in this passage is just legendary. He uses his own daughter as a spy, bargaining chip. It's sad. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a real start. I mean, we're given this insight that multiple times in 25, we know Michal loved David. Michal loved David, we're told that. And then this is the first glimpse where we see she's becoming a political pawn in this civil war. Yeah.
Probably unrelated, but I'm a little confused in this passage. Why does Ishbosheth go and get Michal if this is like Abner trying to come on over to the side of David?
It's a great question. It's really interesting. I saw a couple different thoughts on that in the commentary. I think the idea was David felt like he had a legal right because he had paid this bride price. And so I don't think the implication is that David's spilling Abner's beans to Ishbosheth. I think that's still kind of done in some secrecy. But David thinks he has this right to her because that was a very public thing, right? As you go through that narrative in 1 Samuel 25 about the bride price that he had to pay, You think the people weren't like, ooh, is he going to get him? Like, is this going to work? Like, it was a very public thing. That's one of the takes that I saw, but it's a great question. Yeah, Jake.
It's also interesting, just thinking of myself, if I was in David's situation and Christina was getting ready to get returned to me, and she was eventually going to find out that I didn't even really try to go get her myself, that I think that'd be pretty awkward. So maybe that's why, like, Abner's about to bring Michal back to David, but then David's like, I at least got to do something.
At least got to let, let him know.
Yeah.
It's the least you could do. It's a good point. It's an interesting thought. I don't know. I do think, I love all these comments. I love, the idea, the depravity of Saul. I think we're going to see that the depravity is not just of Saul. I think Michal gets put into this really tricky position, and I do feel a little bad for her at times. But we're going to see that again in a second, where David uses her the exact same way. There's this idea that, Paltiel, he's this victim of this political, he's just a lay person, right? You have these kings and queens and princes, and it's so cinematic. And he's loving, he chases after her for a long time into another town. And then finally Abner turns around and says, hey, puffs out his chest, how I visualize it, and he's like, hey, go, return. What's he gonna do? What option does Paltiel have? Keep in mind, Abner is like a serious warrior. He's no joke. What's he gonna do? David, I agree, the depravity of Saul. Also, David is very clearly politically motivated here. Saul has died. Ishbosheth is on the throne. David has been anointed, and he rules the southern kingdom. How beneficial would it be to have Michal, Saul's daughter, back as a wife? I think very, right? It gives him a play at the whole united Israelite kingdom. Another thing I think that's interesting here is we see this kind of contrast that the love that Paltiel has for Michal is kind of juxtaposed, I guess would be a better word than contrast, with the love that Michal has for David. And don't get me wrong, I'm not at all suggesting that Michal did not love Paltiel. I think that she probably did. But I think that's interesting that the author gives us these little nuggets on each side of this narrative to make sure that we know what these individuals were kind of thinking as this was going on. All right, we gotta hurry up. This always happens. All right, chapter 6. Starting in verse, let's say 16. So I'll recap a little bit. So they're getting the ark, and David finally says, hey, we've had this ark sitting in this guy's house for a while, but it's time to get that thing to Jerusalem. Let's go get that. Let's bring that to Jerusalem. So they go and get that to Jerusalem, and as the ark is coming into the city, David is ecstatic. He's dancing and he's playing, and some of the language that's used is he's playing like a boy almost, like a child. And we're told that he's in a loincloth. So you can imagine, dancing in public in a loincloth would probably be a little graphic, to say the least. And we're going to pick up here in verse 16 here. As the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out of the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord. And she despised him in her heart. And they brought in the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And when David had finished offering the burnt offerings and peace offerings, he blessed all the people in the name of the Lord of hosts. And distributed among all the people, the whole multitude of Israel, both men and women, a cake of bread, a portion of meat, and a cake of raisins to each one. And the people departed, each to his house. So then David returned to bless his household, but Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, how the king of Israel honored himself today, uncovering himself today before the eyes of his servants, female servants, and one of the vulgar fellows shamelessly uncovers himself. And David said to Michal, it was before the Lord who chose me above your father and above all his house to appoint me as prince over Israel. The people of the Lord and I will celebrate before the Lord. I will make myself yet more contemptible than this. I will be abused in your eyes, but by the female servants of whom you have spoken, by them shall I be held in honor. And Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child to the day of her death. Man, there's a lot to unpack there, but I really want to key in on this contrast. How quickly, it was probably a long time, not quickly, but quickly in the narrative that we're given that Michal loved David, and then she despises David. And kind of like Richard said, this idea of like some of the idols and maybe influences that she had, how does David meet those? Well, he doubles down on God, and he doubles down on what he knows is right. Another interesting thing I saw in one of the commentaries was the usage of how they refer to Michal. They continually refer to Michal as the daughter of Saul, which in biblical narrative, usually when you refer to someone, you would refer to them as like the wife of David, for example. And so many of the commentaries suggest that this is a very intentional separation that they're conveying between David and Michal. And I think we're even given a glimpse into that maybe there's some jealousy here with Michal when the young female servants potentially see him naked as he's dancing. And what really keys us into that is the very last words of this verse, and Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child to the day of her death. So I think we see here that David has really become, there's some depravity there as well. They once loved each other. He escaped away, this, Shakespearean kind of idea, and then now, hey, wow, everything becomes real. And there's a kingdom at play here. And yet again, Michal is made as kind of a chess piece here. Any thoughts? Yeah, Larry.
I've always wondered, Zach, like your impression on this. I kind of feel like in the initial deal where David's life is threatened and Michal lets him down out of the window and, goes through the whole fake idol in the bed thing, that was the real issue that David abandoned his wife and left her to the evil intents of Saul. And, maybe he either should have stayed and defended her or taken her with her. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's in some ways it's heartbreaking. I think the one thing that I would say to that is it doesn't seem like it, because David goes on and he's doing fine. And even later, he's got a very good relationship with God as he goes through. And in the account where his other two wives are kidnapped, he directly talks with God. But I don't know. Could he have made his stand there? Would it have worked out the way that it did? I don't know. That's one of the things that I love about this is I think that God is calling us to ask those questions and to think about those questions, especially in the way that it's written. It is written as a story. It's not pure history. It is history. It is historical, but it's written as a story, and it's intended for us to engage with it. But yeah, that's a great question. Could it have played out different? I don't know. Any other thoughts? Yes. I can repeat too.
I guess, and again, it's just pure speculation, but we also don't know how she felt about being brought back to David. Maybe this was kind of it seems like it was obviously another rending of a relationship for her.
Yeah.
So maybe now she's more inclined towards despising him, right?
Yeah.
It didn't take much to set her off, right?
Totally. Yeah, great point. Why should she? David's done to her exactly what her dad did to her. How is he any different, right? Yeah, totally. Great point. Any other thoughts? Yeah, we've got one over here.
Well, I don't think I could be too hard on her for what David was doing in front of the girls and servants. But I think she did have a lust for power in that what she was angry about was that he was not acting like a king in her mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I think it was misplaced anger. And David turns that right back on her. And he says, I'm not celebrating or honoring these slave girls. I'm honoring God directly. Yeah, any other? Oh, yep, one more. Sorry, Brandon. We have 5 minutes left. Is that right? Okay.
I think it's pretty amazing, all the ins and outs of it and the thoughts that are being brought up. But I also think that she idolized the wrong idea of kingdom. Her father was a man that God raised up, but he didn't value his position for the Lord like he should have. And I think that she was hanging on to something that was more of a earthly, fleshly kingdom.
Yeah, great point. I mean, how is that not like the most repeated theme in the Bible? I mean, even Saul, right? Like he was appointed, but he didn't want it. And he continues to struggle throughout the whole time that he is king with knowing how to know what God wants from him. Yeah, great point. Yeah. Got one more, Brandon. Yes.
But how could they just take it from one like that? Her husband. She was given, evidently, her father give her to this other guy after David was gone. So
Yeah.
She must have loved him too.
Totally, absolutely. Yeah, she must have loved Paltiel. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. I think who knows what all is going on inside her head. I'm sure that she is a wreck. Yeah, Dave. Oh, yeah, Art.
You know, she started off loving David, then she ends up here despising him. Does that mean that at that point she's withholding herself from him, or is it? Is she still trying to give him an heir, because then that heir would also be her father's, child through her, and if she was still having relations with David, this may be the Lord punishing her for her stubbornness by not giving her any children.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, that comes up a lot. I think in almost any commentary you'll see this idea of the sexual tension in this conversation between Michal and David in their house after this. And yeah, is the Lord punishing her? Is David punishing her? Usually when it's the Lord, I will say I saw one that said, we'll see this idea of the Lord closed her womb. For example, that phrase is used a lot. And this concept of jealousy that Michal has, a lot of commentators and stuff have suggested that it is more, it's between one of them. It's more like some drama going on between them. And a lot of people, I think, lean David. But yeah, no, it's a great point. Yeah. All right. We have not enough time, but we're going to dig in real quick to Uriah. So chapter 11. So we are separately going to talk about some of David's mistakes later. So I don't want to dig too much into the David and Bathsheba narrative. Because we are going to probably talk about that more later. But I want to talk about Uriah specifically. And this is a big turning point where we see David, this narrative starts off in the spring of the year when the kings go out to battle. David wakes up from a nap at 4 p.m. So we're started to present with this idea that, a lot of his soldiers have said, hey, David, dude, you're going to get hurt. And Jake talked about that, we cannot quench the lamp of Israel, right? And so David's spending a lot more time through messengers and at home and things like that. And we all know what happens. He's on the roof. He sees Bathsheba, and he commits a pretty horrible sin. Let's fast forward a little bit. Yes. Oh, I have 5 more minutes? Oh, amazing. All right. So we're still going to fast forward a little bit, but we're going to pause right here. So he commits this sin. She says, hey, David, I'm pregnant. She sends word to David, and David now is in panic mode. How am I going to fix this? How am I going to make this right? And so he comes up with a plan, and it's a reasonable plan, perhaps. Hey, go get Uriah. Let's bring him back. Let's, have a feast and celebrate with him, and maybe he'll go home and have sex with his wife, and I'm in the clear. Reasonable plan. But it turns out that Uriah is an extremely loyal soldier. One thing that I thought was super interesting was in, in verse... verse 3, sorry. When Bathsheba is introduced to us, it says, is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? One thing to note is that she's introduced by 2 names, her father and Uriah. And these are soldiers not part of the mighty men, but it's commonly thought that because they name both of them together, the father-in-law and Uriah, there's this implication that these were known soldiers. They had some renown. Otherwise, she would have done one or the other. And I think that's interesting. So it's not just some random soldier, but there's this idea that this guy is a good soldier. He's kind of painted as this perfect soldier of Israel, right? Who's being put in this position where a horrible thing has been done to him. And so David comes up with all these plans, gets them to come. They eat, they drink. Then in verse 9, but David slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of the Lord and did not go down to his house. One thing that I think is interesting there too, what do you think it was like when he left the presence of the king and they all went down in front of the house, and it's him and other soldiers and the servants of David? I wonder what they were talking about. And I wonder how public this thing is becoming. It's always been so interesting to me how quick gossip can spread, right? I wonder what they were talking about. They had all had some stuff to drink. They were sitting out there. What was going on? And then going on, continuing in verse, in verse 8. In verse 9. He did not go down to his house. And when they told David, Uriah did not go down to his house, David said to Uriah, have you not come from a journey? Why did you not go down to your house? Uriah said to David, the ark and Israel and Judah dwells in booths, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in the open field. Shall I then go to my house to eat, to drink, and to lie with my wife? As you live, and as your soul lives, he's talking to David, I will not do this thing. Then David said to Uriah, remain here today, and I will send you back tomorrow. I want to pose this question. Does Uriah know? Does Uriah know what has happened? I think a really interesting thing, and we're not going to run the mic because we're running out of time, but I really kind of wonder if in his response to David, he's starting to get this idea of what has happened. Take into account the fact that they were, all the boys, all the lads were, sleeping out in front of David's gates. And then he comes in and David says, hey, why didn't you go to your house? And then Uriah kind of gives this little monologue and he says, should I go? There's this concept of saying the quiet part out loud. Uriah is saying what David won't say directly. If he doesn't know, he's just this ironic political pawn. If he does know, he's not naive, and he's this concept of shrewdly aware. He knows what's going on, but he's still resigned in some ways. And you can take this idea further when he's handed the letter that tells him that he's supposed to give to his commander. Do you think he knew what was in that letter? Do you think he knew that he was holding his fate? I don't know. The takeaway is that it doesn't really matter if he knew or not. The point is he was powerless. Just like Paltiel. He was a pawn in this larger narrative of how David rose to power and how David tries to keep that power. And I know we're at time, but the last thing I'll say is this is the turning point in the book of Samuel, where now we'll see later on Nathan curses David for everything that's happened and says, hey, there's going to be strife in your household. From this point on, David becomes a different kind of king. He's not the guy that can get things done all on his own anymore. He's the kind of guy that's dealing with the sins of his children and the effect that those have on the throne and everything that's going on. This is the turning point from here on. We're way over, so sorry, but thank you, and that is it.